Okay, I'm going to start out with some definitions again, really quickly, and I want to make sure you understand these definitions. Determinism is just the doctrine or situation where the state of a system at a certain time determines what happens next. Remember that there are dozens of things that the word determinism does not mean. Determinism just means that the state of the system at a particular time will determine what it does immediately afterwards. It doesn't say anything about programming or planning or destiny or fate. Right? It doesn't say anything about external constraint or coercion. This is the standard definition of determinism from philosophy and science. If you want to use the word determinism to mean something else, please do it outside my classroom. If you want to use the word determinism to mean cheese production, or the condition of being slightly damp, do it outside. And if you want to use the word determinism to mean not free will, do it outside this classroom. Don't do it on the test. That's not what the word determinism means. You might as well use the word basketball to mean people cannot make cheese. Random means not determined. That's all it means. If a system is random, it wasn't determined. If an event is random, it wasn't determined. If an event was determined, it wasn't random. You can take determinism. An easy way to understand the term determinism is to see it as saying non-randomness. Volitional determinism just says that what a person does next, if someone is operating under volitional determinism, what they do next is determined by their internal state, everything about them, everything that affects them, that ensemble of things that affect them, work out to them doing something. Right? Their present state determines what the person does next. It's volitional because volition means the mental part of you actually doing something. An impulse that you do not follow through on. If you have the impulse to punch someone, but you don't do it, the volition is the thing that made you hold back from punching. The volition is the mental part of what you do. That contrasts with volitional indeterminism. Volitional indeterminism is a state in which what you do is not determined. Another way of saying volitional determinant, saying that it's not determined, is to say that it's random. If something is not determined, it's not determined. Random is a word for not determined. So, if your brain operates under volitional determinism, and you are in a cold stone wanting chocolate ice cream, and you make a decision to get chocolate ice cream, and then that results in a volition to get chocolate ice cream, right? You're ready for the chocolate. That's what you want. You don't have any reason not to do it. All of everything about you adds up to you're going to order chocolate ice cream. If you're operating under volitional determinism, you will order chocolate ice cream. That's what volitional determinism means. You want chocolate ice cream, you decide to order chocolate ice cream, you order chocolate ice cream. That's volitional determinism. If volitional determinism is not true, wanting chocolate ice cream, deciding to order chocolate ice cream does not add up to ordering chocolate ice cream. It adds up to who knows what. It's completely unpredictable. You might turn around and slap the person standing behind you. You might do a little dance. You might fall over and foam at the mouth. You might go blah. Just write down a list of all the things that it's possible for you to do, and that would be many, many thousands of possible things that you could do, many thousands of possible actions, far more than I could ever think of. Make out that list and use a randomizing device like a dice to figure out what you're going to do. And that's what it's like to operate without volitional determinism. If you had a switch on the back of your head that turned off determinism in your brain, every time you turned that switch off, you would go into some kind of epileptic fit. You would be unable to maintain a consciousness. You would be unable to maintain a self, because all of that depends on your brain working deterministically. If your brain works indeterministically, you're basically dead. Your body is still there, twitching, but you're gone. You as a person are gone. So, volitional indeterminism is the state in which what you do, what you think, what you feel is entirely random with respect to what you were doing, thinking, feeling the previous instant. That's what randomness means. Okay. Freewillism is a word I had to make up because apparently no one had thought of a word for this before. And that just sort of drives me crazy because there should be a word for it. Okay, someone just come in. Who just came in? Who came in last? Okay, I may have missed someone who came in. Ah, okay. Marissa? No, it's just my eyes are bad, not my memory. Okay, free willism. Actually, this is the word that I'm really mad that I had to make up. I should not have had to make up this word, because people have been talking about the idea that free will doesn't exist for hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 years, but they don't have a word for it. Instead, they use a word that means a completely different thing. What word do they use? It's the first word here. They say determinism. It's like using the word basketball to mean cheese production is impossible. Or like using the word oxygen to say that people can't breathe. But wait, there's more. Okay, here's a few more definitions. I'll put them in blue, purple, and green. Libertarianism. Libertarianism is the combination of free willism plus volitional indeterminism. Libertarianism says you have free will. However, determinism is not true for your brain. It is not true. Determinism is not true, at least as far as it affects your will. Which means they are explicitly saying that you have free will, but your brain operates completely randomly. They don't admit that this is what they're saying, but this is what they say. If you deny determinism in the brain, all you're saying, all you can possibly be saying, is that what goes on in your brain is random. What's the next one? Libertarianism. Soft determinism. It's a very strange, very strange name, but we're stuck with it. Soft determinism is free willism. Right? Free willism, in other words, it says that you have free will, that there are situations in which what you do is determined by what you think and decide, rather than by some outside force that makes you do it. There is a bunch of rubbish in the book pretending purporting to tell you what soft determinists believe, but it's not what soft determinists believe. It's what St. Augustine believes, it's what the Stoics believe, it's not what soft determinists believe. A soft determinist believes that your volitional system is deterministic and you have free will. It accepts determinism, accepts volitional determinism, and rejects incompatibilism, which I haven't even defined yet, but I will. Actually, I'll go and put that. I'll put that on the other side. Incompatibilism is the doctrine, or as I like to call it, the fantasy, the myth, the bizarre anti-logical belief. Anti-logical, I just made up a new insult. That's anti-logical. Incompatibilism is the doctrine that determinism rules out free will. It is something many people think is a matter of definition. It is not. If you believe that determinism rules out free will, you have to be able to say more than, but if it's determined, it's not free. Or as someone said to me the other day, but if it's determined, how can it be free? And to which I reply, well, if people play basketball in Los Angeles, how can they make cheese? Answer me that. And when you look at them and say, well, it just does. Right? They make cheese. Determinism has nothing to do with free will. In that way, there's nothing about determinism that means you can't have free will. If you think there's something about determinism that means that your free will will be taken away, that ninja will drop from the ceiling and force you to do whatever it was you decided to do, explain how that works. I don't think it can possibly happen. I think it's ridiculous. I mean, I haven't checked the ceiling. I don't know if there's ninja up there or not. There might be, but I think it's really unlikely. And it would be up to you to prove that there's ninja there or something equivalent. So, if you think that determinism means you cannot have free will, you are in the position of someone who says, if people play basketball in Los Angeles and Orange County, no one in those areas can possibly make cheese. You have to come up with a connection between basketball and cheese making. You have to come up with a connection between determinism and free will such that determinism creates this coercion that would rob you of free will. And there's no way of doing that. Well, I mean, I don't know anyway. Maybe someone out there, someone in the world could come up with something. I haven't seen it yet. And I've read people who claim to prove that determinism rules out free will. And they just don't come up with anything. Compatibilism is a doctrine that determinism does not rule out free will, and the basic argument for compatibilism is every time someone asserts incompatibilism, they completely fail to come up with anything even remotely resembling a reason. All they do is repeat the same thing over and over again in different words. They just say it does. They say, if it's determined, it's not free. If it's determined, it's not free. If it's determined, it's not free. Over and over again in different words every time. But when you ask them, well, why? They say, well, they don't have anything. They just say, well, if it's determined, then it's not free. Right? If it was determined, then you didn't make a choice. It's like, well, yes, you did. So it's like dealing with someone like that is like dealing with someone who thinks that basketball rules out cheese production, or any two unconnected things. Well, actually, it's not quite like that. It's worse. Dealing with someone who thinks determinism rules out free will is like dealing with someone who thinks oxygen rules out breathing. Imagine you run into someone who says, do do you think there's oxygen in this room? And you say, well, yeah, of course I do. Aha! I can prove there's no oxygen in the room. You're breathing, aren't you? Yeah, I'm breathing. Ha-ha! If there was oxygen in the room, you would not be able to breathe. So therefore, there's no oxygen in the room. And you go, what? Now, if you can really imagine having that kind of conversation, that's the emotional state I'm in when I meet someone who thinks that determinism rules out free will. Because logically, it's like saying oxygen rules out breathing. There's the doctrine of necessitism, which says that determinism is necessary for free will to exist. Determinism is necessary for free will. If you lose the determinism in your brain, you will lose your free will. In fact, you will cease to exist as a person. Your brain will not be able to make you if your brain stops being deterministic. And if you think that maybe your brain is a little indeterministic, there's a little randomness going on, okay, that's fine. But you've got to remember that that randomness destroys you. Where your brain acts randomly with respect to your aims and purposes, with respect to your personality, it eats you away. If there was a determinism switch that flipped on and off in your brain, it would be exactly like having epilepsy. Every time the determinism switch flips off and your brain becomes indeterministic, it would be like having an epileptic fit. Your brain would cease to work, your personality would cease to exist for that time. And if you have little bits of randomness in your brain, hope that they don't get more prevalent. Because you can handle a little bit of randomness in your brain. It's like driving a car on a rocky road. You don't know what's going to happen, so you have to really control it. So if you find randomness growing in your brain, see a doctor. And until you get to the doctor, have very tight control, because you have no idea what you're going to do next. Okay. Now, I'm going to briefly recap the progression from Laplace through to Holbach. Okay, Laplace is the guy with the big if. If we knew all, we could predict all. That is, if we were omniscient, had infinite mental capacity. Have you ever met someone with photographic memory? Someone who knows all of the statistics of the LA Raiders right back to the time they were founded. Or knows all the statistics in baseball, right back to Alexander Cartwright. Hey, right back to when they were playing baseball in England, in the days of Jane Austen. They know all the statistics of every baseball match ever played. Now imagine someone knows that for every particle in the universe. Knows every particle in the universe to infinite precision. that it has an infinite series of digits for every particle in the universe. Not just mass, but all the vectors too. I mean, to describe the position of one single particle with exactitude would fill all the libraries of all the books and all the libraries of the Earth with numbers beyond the decimal point, and you still wouldn't do it. But let's imagine we could. We could do every particle in the world, and we have infinite ability to extrapolate from a present situation, and we have precise knowledge of all the laws of nature. Yes, if we had that enormous, inconceivable computing power, we could predict all the future and retrodict all the past. Except for the part where it's buggered up by quantum mechanics. But if quantum mechanics wasn't in the picture, yes, of course we could do that. But the trouble is, that's an enormous if. That is an if as big as the universe. We never do that. We can never do that. Determinism does not mean predictable. If a system is deterministic, that does not mean that it will be predictable. We are familiar with tons of deterministic systems that we cannot predict. The weather is a deterministic system. Hitting a baseball with a baseball bat is a deterministic system. But if you don't know exactly how the bat is, I mean, how many fielders can look at how the batter is holding the bat and how the ball is flying towards the batter and the angle at which it hits and know exactly where the ball is going? Now, if you're really good, you can approach that. There may be some people who can do that. But most of us, when we play baseball, we wait to see where it's going before we start running. Next time you're at a baseball game, watch the fielders. See if there's anyone there who starts running before the ball hits the bat. It's logically possible to predict that if you have the computing power. And, you know, we've had geniuses in history. We had Mozart, who was a musical genius when he was like 12, the little son of a bitch. There can be baseball savants too. Babe Ruth had amazing powers. So watch to see if you can see a fielder start to run before. That would be an amazing guy. I'd love to hear about that. So determined doesn't mean predictable. Some determined systems are predictable, but lots of them are not. Okay, I want to do hold on. We're physical, so we're determined. This is basically volitional determinism. If it turned out to be true that our brains operated deterministically, completely deterministically, would that mean that our behavior was predictable? And the answer is no. Our human behavior is so complex, human mental processing is so complicated and involves so many billions of operations a second. Right? Think about this. This is a brain which has several millions, billions, thousands of millions of individual little computers working in parallel. It's massive parallel processing, gargantuan parallel processing. There's no way you can predict that. And human behavior could end up, for some individuals, human behavior could end up to be completely unpredictable. But, and here's an important thing, To the extent that anyone's behavior is predictable, it must be determined. Imagine you know a person who has a little wobble switch in his brain, a random switch in his brain that turns off determinism for parts of his brain. A neuronic randomizer built in that randomly chooses neurons and brain systems and randomizes them. Turns off determinism. But not all the time. How would you tell when the determinism was turned on? Well, sometimes you won't be able to tell. But when his behavior is predictable, the determinism is on. When the behavior is random, it won't be predictable. You'll have no idea why he did that. So when he does something at random, maybe he actually chose to do it. Something that looks random, maybe he chose to do it and you just don't know what's going on in his head. Or maybe it was just random, that the machine turned his determinism off. But when he does something that you can predict, that was determined. Whoops, go back. So, predictability implies determinism. If somebody goes to church every Sunday, unless he has a good reason not to, then that says there's a deterministic process at work. He has an impulse to go to church. In most circumstances, it makes him go to church. But when he's sick or something else intervenes, he won't make that choice. He will choose to do something else. And that choice will be determined by the difference in circumstance. If he was acting at random, if he was not acting deterministically, you would not be able to predict it. Now, why now, this, I mean, is all very simple to me, but it gets complicated and it gets weird when you bring in a very important concept. Moral responsibility. Now, I once had a conversation with a colleague where I laid out the argument that I basically give here, that free will requires determinism. And my friend said, but what about moral responsibility? I said, well, what? Well, there are people who care about moral responsibility. And I said, well, good for them. I care about moral responsibility too. But if it's determined, you don't have moral responsibility. I said, well, yes, you do. Why would you think that? And my friend started in on an argument that I thought was utterly bizarre. And the argument was because we want moral responsibility, and some of us suffer from the delusion that determinism rules out free will, we have to believe that our will is not determined. And so why do you have to believe that? Just because you want something and you think you can't get it if determinism is true, why would you think that makes determinism untrue? I want a house. But because I'm an adjunct rather than a full-timer, I couldn't possibly afford one. But I want a house. So therefore it must be true I have a full-time job. Well, it's horrible that I don't have a house. So it must be true that I have a full-time job. It just doesn't work that way. Logic doesn't work that way. I'm going to lay this out in detail. Today and Wednesday I'm going to lay out this thing in detail. And I'm going to try and do the sensible stuff in black and the stupid stuff in red. Let's see how well I do. So, Campbell. Okay. Moral responsibility entails free will. Moral responsibility entails free will. If you're going to be sent to jail for robbing a bank, your conviction would only be just if you robbed the bank of your own free will. Which means that it could only be just if you actually chose to rob the bank. You are morally responsible for the reasonably foreseeable consequences of actions you choose to undertake. If someone holds a gun to your head and forces you to do something, your moral responsibility is diminished. You may even be excused. Right? If someone ties a bomb to you and makes you rob a bank, you are not guilty because you did not do it of your own free will. So, but if nobody forces you and you go in and rob that bank, you're guilty because you could have, the deterministic process in your brain could have worked its way out that you didn't. If the situation, something going on in your brain was slightly different, you would have a different result. You wouldn't do it. You'd make a different choice. And if you had chosen to do otherwise, you could do otherwise. So, moral responsibility entails free will. That's what entails means. It's not possible to have moral responsibility unless free will exists. Is that part clear? Free will entails two things. One, first thing is you can just do it. You know, free will, acting of free will to rob the bank, you can do it. That's kind of trivial. Why did I put two? Well, actually, I'm going to put this in red. I want you to look, I want you to think about this phrase. You could do it. Okay, let's say you're just about to rob the bank. You're ready to rob the bank. You're determined to rob the bank. You're absolutely ready to rob the bank. And nothing goes through your mind You don't have any thoughts that make you change it. You're ready to rob the bank. Out comes the gun. You go in. At the point you decide to rob the bank, that determines that you do the bank. So you can do it. I want you to think about this. Let's say you are determined to do something. You have made your volition to do something. You have made a volition to do something, which then you will do. Let's say you've made the volition to do something. I don't know what it is. To have chocolate ice cream, to get up at the end of class, to something where to go to a basketball game or the beach, right? You have some kind of choice. You make a decision. You have the volition to do it, and you're just about to do it, right? Or you're in the process of doing it. Now, Campbell says it's only your free will if at the moment you've decided to do one thing, you could do something else that you have not decided to do. That's why this is in red. It sounds sensible. Well, you could do otherwise, but it's actually wrong. And in a few minutes, if I've got time today, I'm going to put in the right criteria. This is wrong. This is Campbell's criterion, but it's wrong. And I'd like you to try and think up why it's wrong. Now, at this point, this is where Campbell's argument goes all to hell. I need to put in some space. Determinism implies that we couldn't do otherwise. Okay, determinism implies that if you make a volition to have chocolate ice cream, it can't happen that against your wishes you have vanilla. Right? You don't want vanilla, you want chocolate, and that's part of what determines your decision. That determines you choose something. You say, I'll have chocolate. And Campbell says, no! That's good. That you don't have free will, because if it's determined, then you couldn't say, I'll have a monkey on a stick, or something else random, something else that's different from what you want. Right. So he says, determinism implies we couldn't do otherwise. And that's wrong, and it's mainly wrong because this is wrong. So I'm going to fill in the right thing later. Okay. If we can't do otherwise than what we choose to do, then we don't have free will. Yes, it's bizarre, but that's what Campbell is actually saying, if you take his words seriously. Okay, no free will, then no moral responsibility. This is a fact. This is something that I fully agree with. Everyone should recognize this. This is something nobody denies. Therefore, determinism is false. There's his conclusion. And it's red because it's wrong. And it's wrong for two reasons. There are two reasons that he's wrong. One of them is up here in something he says, and the other wrongness stems from the fact that there's something he cannot say. There's something he sort of assumes, he wants us to assume, but he can't say it out loud, because if he said it out loud, he would have to admit that he can't prove it. So there's something he really cannot say, that he wants to say, he passionately wants to say. He would get all mad at me if I pointed out that he can't say it, but he can't say it. Right now, this argument is almost exactly parallel to an argument given by B.F. Skinner, who is the wild man of psychology, the behaviorist. Again, moral responsibility entails free will. If there's no free will, there's no moral responsibility. Now, Skinner starts at the other end. He starts with science, with psychology, sociology, economics. Human behavior is more and more predictable as time goes on. The more we learn about humans, the more we can predict their behavior. We learn, and basically we're learning the patterns of behavior, how human beings tend to act. And since Skinner wrote, there's been an explosion in results that show more and more areas where human behavior is predictable. Remember the relationship between determinism and predictability? And this is a profound mistake in our textbook. Our textbook gets this relationship exactly backwards. If a behavior is predictable, that means it's determined. So the fact that human behavior is more and more predictable means and this is logically rock solid. If something is predictable, it's determined, because if it wasn't determined, it could not possibly be predictable. Human behavior is more and more shown to be determined. Now, here's where Skinner goes wrong. Skinner is an incompatibilist. I don't know why he would make this mistake, but he does. Skinner subscribes to the myth that free will rules, that determinism rules out free will. But you add that to the fact that human behavior is determined, you come to the false conclusion that there is no free will. And And then you further come to the further, and in my view, false conclusion there is no moral responsibility. Skinner's argument is that agreeing with Campbell that determinism implies that we have no free will, determinism implies that we can't do otherwise, agreeing with Campbell, but adding in all the social science data that shows that human behavior is predictable and therefore deterministic, Campbell comes to the opposite conclusion. He says there is no moral responsibility. Now I'm going to ask you, which one of these people backs up his major premise? Which one of these backs up the claim upon which he relies? Which one of these has solid facts to stand on, and which one is just indulging in wish fulfillment? Is believing in something that he cannot prove, that he does not prove, that he does not even think about proving, and without which his argument completely collapses. Campbell. Yes. Campbell. Moral responsibility and free will are incompatible. Sorry. Moral responsibility and determinism are incompatible, according to Campbell. I don't agree. But let's roll with that for a moment. If it's true that moral responsibility and determinism are incompatible, which one do we have evidence for? We have lots of evidence for determinism, and Campbell has offered nothing for moral responsibility. Can anyone give me any evidence that... I don't want evidence that people believe in moral responsibility. Right? That's like asking for evidence that people believe in ghosts. Sure, people believe in ghosts. Doesn't prove there are ghosts. Do we have any evidence that moral responsibility exists independent of our belief that it does, or some people's belief that it does? Do we have any evidence that moral responsibility exists apart from people's belief that it does? I can't think of any, and I've never heard Campbell or Palmer or anyone give that. So, moral responsibility rules out determinism. Determinism rules out moral responsibility. We have evidence for determinism. We have none for moral responsibility. The only logical conclusion that we can draw from this is that there is no moral responsibility. If we take Campbell's logic seriously, if we go along with this, there is no moral responsibility. If we take all of Campbell's premises and analyze them logically, they prove there is no moral responsibility. If we want moral responsibility to exist, we have to find something wrong with Campbell's argument. Because in the parts that it shares with Skinner's argument, it proves there's no moral responsibility. Campbell has basically given Skinner's argument, but he's reversed the evidence with the conclusion. Now, in the last 5 minutes, I'm basically going to let you guys think about this between now and Wednesday. In the last 5 minutes, I'm going to give the argument for soft determinism. argument for soft determinism is very simple. You go out in the world and you watch humans interacting and you see tons and tons and tons of evidence of free will, because sometimes people make decisions without being coerced and other times their free will is taken away by coercion. Sometimes people are forced to do stuff, other times they do it out of their own choice. Therefore, free will exists. It is part of our experience that free will exists. Another part of our experience is determinism is true. Determinism is true for absolutely everything 99% of the world interacts with. I doubt that you've had any experience of indeterminism at all. The randomness the quote-unquote randomness you've experienced has been randomness in the sense of being completely unpredictable, or being outside your control, of having the causality. Right? It's like when my girlfriend and I ran into my ex-wife and my daughter in Julian. We're just walking down the street window shopping, and suddenly Joan goes, "Oh, and there's Eris. There's my daughter in a car with her mom." What the hell? That wasn't random. That was two different causal chains, two different deterministic causal chains that happened to intersect at just that point. It was coincidence. It wasn't random.
Were you busy?
Nah, my ex was though. Yeah. So there's the first argument for soft determinism. They both exist. We have abundant evidence for both. It's like saying, well, you know, we know basketball doesn't rule out cheese production because they play basketball and they make cheese. Not at the same time, all right?
Yeah, but they have nachos.
They have nachos. See? Nachos proves my point! You should get a t-shirt. Nachos proves my point. I'm going to get up on Cafe Press. Nachos proves my point. No one would get it. Not even if I explained it. The second argument. Campbell's wrong. I'll talk about that on Wednesday, how Campbell goes wrong. Third argument. I think I got a third argument. Necessitism. Did we deal with Heisenberg here? Yeah, I had you read Heisenberg. What happens when your brain isn't determined? There's a beautiful account of what happens if your brain isn't determined in the book. You can't walk across the room without throwing yourself through a window or something. Something that no one could possibly predict. When indeterminism strikes, it all goes to heck with hilarious results. Well, hilarious for people watching, not necessarily hilarious for us. Okay. So, on Wednesday, I will start again at this point. And between now and Wednesday, if you feel like it, you could think about what exactly is wrong with Campbell's argument, apart from the fact that he assumes the existence of moral responsibility and never does a thing to prove it. Okay, see you Wednesday. Did anyone come in at the last minute after Vincent?
Give me a glove. Thank you.
Ah! It's still going.